In 500 to 400 BC, Lao Tzu, a Chinese philosopher, wrote the first book on Taoism. So why should we listen to some guy from 2,500 years ago who was probably pissing on whatever tree he wanted when nowadays we have like TikTok or something? Well, a lot of what he talks about still applies today. And remember, this guy started an entire philosophical movement based on this one book that he published in 500 BC. Clearly, if it was something that stupid, it wouldn't have made it this far. I won't waste your time. Here are 3 important lessons from the Tao Te Ching, a book about the way and the power of the way by Lao Tzu himself, brought to you by some random guy you found on the internet. If you are depressed, you are living in the past. If you are anxious, you are living in the future. If you are at peace, you are living in the present. So what the hell does it even mean to surrender yourself to the present moment? Essentially, there's only one time in your life where you have true power, and that is right now. The past was, and the future will be. And the best thing that a man can do is try his best today, sleep, and then try again tomorrow. If you're familiar with Stoicism, you might recognize that this is very similar to the idea of recognizing what's in your control and what is not in your control. The wise man can distinguish between the two and recognizes that it's not fair to obsess over things that are outside your control. And essentially it comes down to one statement, which is, if you are bothered by something, then change it. If you cannot change it, then accept it. Men who've accepted this kind of ideology have literally lost their fear of death. Death is an inevitability. It could happen tomorrow. It could happen in 50 years. If we somehow enhance technology enough, it could be like 300 years. Who knows? Eventually, though, it will come. And instead of trying to run from it your entire life and letting it obsess and control you, we are taught instead to let go, as it's something that's just going to happen no matter what, and there's no point in obsessing over it. It could even be the time in the past where you pissed yourself in 2nd grade. Obsessing over it now is not going to change the fact that you still got laughed at and you had to change your pants in the nurse's office. You cannot live in fear of the future, and you cannot obsess over the past, as these are things that are outside of your control, and the only thing that you can control is in the present. I'm not saying be ignorant of the future. Obviously, there are things that's like, okay, well, if I don't start working on this now, then I'm going to have, a bad thing happen in the future. Obviously, put it into consideration. Acknowledge your past. Acknowledge your mistakes that you've made, but don't obsess over them. There's a key distinction between the two. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is true power. If you're part of Gen Z, you're probably familiar with the term villain arc, which is just this really corny term that people use, say, oh, I'm on my villain arc, because they got wronged once and they're super bitter about it, and then they spend the rest of their time obsessing over the people that wronged them instead of just essentially detaching and focusing on themselves and making their own life better for themselves and not for others. That is basically what the point of this quote is you need to master yourself and not master others. Strength comes from being able to control your emotions and control your life and go down the path that you want. Rather than spending your entire life trying to suppress other people, you should instead begin to learn how to suppress yourself and make sure that you're going down the path that you want. At the end of the day, the term power comes from having control. And so a lot of people often think that power is control over others, but power can also be control over yourself. Imagine if with a flip of a switch, you can make it so that you are easily amused by everything. You can easily be happy by whatever metric you want. Or you can just stay and have some kind of high level of requirement for happiness, such as, oh, I need to get this car, I need to have this gigantic mansion. Which would make you have a happier life? Well, one with lower measurements, not caring what other people think, just being happy with what you have, or following this whole rat race of trying to get the next best thing so that you can hopefully really show those guys that used to bully you before. Mastering yourself and controlling your emotions is the number one way to freedom. The 5 colors blind our eyes. The 5 notes deafen our ears. The 5 flavors dull our taste. Racing, chasing, hunting drives people crazy. Trying to get rich ties people in knots. So the wise soul watches with the inner, not the outward eye, letting that go, keeping this. This kind of touches on the last point a little bit as well. So essentially what he's talking about here is There's so much noise in our lives. We're constantly being bombarded with unnecessary information. This hustle culture. Go do this, go do that. In order to get this, then you'll be happy. The whole purpose is that you just need to let go and hold on to what you have already inside of you. You think thousands and thousands of years ago they needed a Lamborghini to be happy? No. They didn't even have cars. Instead, all they had was sore feet and, I don't know, they pissed on trees a bunch. We need to be grateful with what we already have, because a lot of people don't realize this, but a lot of rich people, as much as it sounds like it's a total cope, are actually unhappy because they haven't figured out what their definition of happiness should be. There's all these rappers and, artists out there who are spending all of their money despite having everything, and they're living paycheck to paycheck because they can't keep it because they just have to keep spending to show it off. That's why so many of them fall into drugs and totally spiral out of control, whereas some poor farmer in the middle of some random country in the middle of nowhere is perfectly content just fishing some days. What is true happiness then? Well, happiness is freedom. Freedom from the noise. Freedom from the rat race. Freedom from the obligation to prove yourself against others, and instead, just be yourself. Happiness is being yourself and living as free and simple as possible. It is attainable for anyone. Now I know I've talked this entire time like Lao Tzu is some really cool dude who wrote a book thousands of years ago, but historians don't even know if this dude's actually real. In fact, Lao Tzu translates to old master. It's very vague and there is no true identity for the guy. There's a running theory right now that might have been a couple of people, dozen people that wrote this entire thing together, but either way, they still founded a philosophical ideology that's lasted thousands of years that we call Taoism. Take this knowledge that's lived on for over 2,000 years. Remember what's in your control and what's out of your control. Remember to master yourself and to live simply. We can all be like Lao Tzu. The next time you feel like you're being overwhelmed with work and there's 1,000 things to do and it's all running through your head that you have to do this and that and this and that, just remember, at the end of the day, there's only one constant in life, and that is yourself. If you want to be free from the noise, remember to let go of that and keep this. Have a good night.